Hello, everyone. Welcome to this December's Harrisburg Area Geological Society meeting. I am actually the treasurer, Michael Meyer, filling in for Kent Littlefield, who is our president. He couldn't be with us tonight, but he is in spirit. We have a very special meeting for tonight. We have 4 different student presentations. So we have Aleksandra Dimova and Sarah Ryan from Harrisburg, from Penn State, Harrisburg. And then we have Dakota Cleary and Aaron Stone from Harrisburg University. And they all have various projects that they're going to be speaking on. And I think it's going to be a pretty good set of talks. Now, some quick society business. So we'd like to thank all of our past speakers for this past fall session. It has been kind of a whirlwind of a last few months, and I think all of the sessions have gone very well. We, of course, are looking forward to our spring one, and that is where everyone should remember that at least as of right now, we do not have any Zoom, any HAGS meetings for this next January. Maybe we come up with something small and temporary. We, of course, will let everyone know, but at least for the moment, and you can, put on your calendars, we're just going to strike January from that. And so then we're going to get started on February. And in that regard, Amy, our secretary, will be working on preparing the PDH from the fall session. So hopefully that'll be sent out by the end of January to everyone who has applied for them. Amy, is there anything else that you would like to say while we're here?
I can't think of anything. Just make sure everybody tries to get logged in by no later than 6:40 so they get their name in the chat log.
Name and PG number.
PG number, yes.
So wonderful. So we're going to start off with Aleksandra. So Aleksandra, you can unmute yourself and get started whenever you're ready.
Right away. Okay. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen just fine.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you everyone for joining in this evening to listen more about our projects. My research focuses on the restoration activities of streams in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and their long-term efficiency in restoring the water quality and stream biota. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge my professors and co-authors of this research, Dr. Shirley Clark and Dr. Jennifer Slyko, for their enormous guidance and support during this whole project. A little bit background about this research. So the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load focuses on the removal and reductions of nutrients and sediment from the waters that are flowing into the bay. And currently stream restoration is used as the most common practice to achieve those total maximum daily load goals, to offset the loss of stream function, to stabilize and to repair the stream channels, and just to help to protect the watershed in general. However, even with the increased amount of resources devoted for these practices, common complaint is that there is not enough post-project monitoring of these studies. Usually, the monitoring comes from 1 to 3 years post-restoration, where the benefits are expected simply from removing the legacy sediment from prior industrial and agricultural activities. Additionally, the data is rarely categorized by the type of the restoration, which can be stream bank stabilization and floodplain restoration. Therefore, with this research, we try to answer these questions by evaluating the water quality above and below 4 older restoration sites at Lititz Run and its major tributary, Santo Domingo Creek. As I mentioned, these streams are located in the northern Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. Lititz Run flows from Lititz Springs Park, so it starts as a spring. It flows through Lititz and Warwick Township, while picking up flows from Santo Domingo, Hubbard's Run, and numerous springs. It flows into the Conestoga River, which in turn flows into the Chesapeake Bay. Efforts were made to pick up restoration sites that were older than 10 years. So we have 19 sampling sites in total that are divided into 4 restoration sites, which are New Street Park, Oak Street Wetlands, Riparian Park, and Millport Conservancy. Site 7, which is the Lititz Springs Park, and Site 8, the Front Street, were additionally added in order to observe some inputs above and between restorations. For example, the Lititz Springs Park is pure groundwater, and this is an area where there is groundwater contamination. So we wanted to see how is that influencing the level of nutrients throughout the whole stream. And the Front Street site is the site immediately after Santo Domingo flows into Lititz Run. So we wanted to see, and that site is not restored, and we wanted to see the influence of nutrients there. Field data collection to date occurred every season. So we started last summer of 2020 and collected samples during summer, fall, December, winter, spring, and this October. December does not fall into our winter sampling data because it showed different results. Water testing was conducted upstream and downstream of the restoration, as well as at specifically identified inputs like the inlet at the New Street Park restoration site. We analyzed the samples on total nitrogen, total phosphorus, nitrate, ammonia, and chemical oxygen demand. And for the purpose of our time, for this presentation, I will focus only on the New Street Park and the Riparian Park restoration sites because they showed most interesting results. So the New Street Park restoration site is the only site that's located along Santo Domingo Creek. The restoration here happened in the late 1990s. Before restoration, parts of this creek were severely degraded. The straight and steam banks were steep and eroded. The channel cut down deep into the legacy sediment, and flooding was a frequent problem into the heavily populated areas. As we can see on figure 5, how the banks looked at Santo Domingo. So the multi-phase ecological restoration really improved the water quality. The downstream bridges were protected from debris and damage, and the water storage was improved. There is floodplain restoration at the upper side of this location with a lot of vegetation along the creek that's really beneficial for uptaking the excessive amount of nutrients. And the downstream site is more of a stream bank stabilization site with mowing of the vegetation very close to the edge of the creek. We have a total of 6 sampling locations in this area, as we can see on the map. I would like to emphasize the second location, which is the New Street Park after a manhole location. When we sampled here and when we stirred out the sediment, there was a really bad odor, and we suspect that the manholes or the switch pipes here are leaking, as we'll see later in the results. Additionally, during our sampling, it's important to mention that during our fall sampling, the flow of the stream was also really low, and at some parts, like at the creek bend, there was no water at all, which again influenced the level of nutrients. The Riparian Park restoration site is along Lititz Run. The restoration here happened in the 1990s. Before restoration, this was a sterile high maintenance grass field, and the restoration showed that natural systems can be incorporated into even small scale projects. This is a complete stream bank armoring restoration site. Bioengineering was used to stabilize the banks. There's, as we can see on figure 12, a lot of vegetation along the stream banks, and additionally, they created a wetland that's adjacent to the stream in order to filter the excessive amount of pollutants. We have a total of 4 sampling locations at this area, and there are 2 possible inputs of nutrients here, which is the trout hatchery and the wastewater treatment facility. So when we talk about the results for total nitrogen, we realized that the seasonality plays a really important factor. The highest concentrations for both of these streams is for winter, spring, and October, and the lowest is for summer and early fall. This phenomenon, when we have high concentration in winter and lowest during summer, was seen also in different studies. The reason behind this can be because of several factors. First, we saw on the photos, the vegetation. There's, of course, more vegetation in summer. That's really beneficial for taking the total nitrogen in compared to winter. Second, during winter, especially the winter of 2020 and 21, there were several snowstorms. So when there is snow and ice, the total nitrogen can be trapped inside the snow, and when it melts with the runoff, it can be let go into the stream. Additionally, the groundwater contamination. The water table in this area is highest during spring and lowest during early fall. So those are some of the factors that are influencing these concentrations. The difference for Santo Domingo, as we can see in the second graph, the red line, is that there is an increase also for fall before the storm in the downstream site. The reason behind this, as we saw in the photos, is can be the low flow of the creek combined with the influence of the manholes at the second location. The nitrate concentrations are again influenced by seasonality, the same as total nitrogen. The highest are for winter, spring, and October, and the lowest are for summer and early fall. The box plus here represent the historical data that we've obtained from the Lititz Run Watershed Alliance. So the positive things about these streams is that there's a lot of historical data about them, and it was good for us to compare the situation of these streams like before 20 years and now. So as we can see from the period before 1996 to 2018, on the first graph, the concentration of nitrate was way higher when we compared between 2014 and 2018, which again shows the positivity of these restorations after 15 to 20 years. For Santo Domingo, again, we see that increase for fall before the storm at the downstream side, but there's also increase for the December concentration on the downstream side. The reason behind this can be the absence of vegetation during the colder months, and again, the downstream side of this restoration is stream bank stabilization, which is not really beneficial at reducing the amount of nitrates. The ammonia concentrations are not really influenced by seasonality for Lititz Run or the riparian park restoration side. As I mentioned, there are two possible inputs of nutrients or of ammonia, which is a trout hatchery located half a kilometer above the upstream location and the wastewater treatment facility. Usually from trout hatcheries, there is ammonia from the fish excretion and the sediment diffusion, and from wastewater treatment facility, the ammonia comes from the discharge. So we always have to consider those two objects when we analyze the ammonia at the riparian park. The Santo Domingo ammonia concentrations reduce as the creek flows downstream in the wetland for most of the seasons. The highest concentration is during fall before the storm. As we can see at the second location below the manholes, it reaches almost 1.2 milligrams per liter. But when it goes downstream, that concentration significantly reduces, which shows the benefits of the riparian vegetation along the stream in reducing the level of ammonia. On these photos, we can see the trout hatchery in the wastewater treatment facility that I mentioned. And here are the manholes at the New Street Park. The total phosphorus concentration for Lititz Run is constantly increasing as the stream moves downstream. Again, the highest concentration is for fall before the storm when the stream had lowest concentration, lowest flow. For total phosphorus, we have to consider again the presence of the trout hatchery in the wastewater treatment facility. But we also have to consider that the riparian park is completely stream bank armoring restoration site, which according to previous studies is not really beneficial in reducing the excessive amount of total phosphorus. It's just beneficial in stabilizing the bank and bed of the stream. The Santo Domingo site, similarly like ammonia, has low concentrations for most of the seasons, except for fall before the storm, when it reaches 2 milligrams per liter at the second location, with significant decrease as the stream moves downstream. Lastly, the chemical oxygen demand for Lititz Run also is not influenced by seasonality. The highest concentration is for fall before the storm. Usually when there is increase in COD, it means that there is some degradation of organic matter, and that means that there is boost in aerobic bacterial activity and the dissolved oxygen level is decreasing. The biological oxygen demand concentrations that box plus is the historical data that we obtained from the Lititz Run Watershed Alliance and has smaller values than the COD, which is normal. For Santo Domingo, the highest concentration is again for fall before the storm with 74 milligrams per liter at the second location. That means that these leaking from the sewage pipes have some organic pollution. And we again see some increase at the downstream location during summer. Some of the conclusions from our research is that these restorations have long-term effectiveness, so they're functioning after 15 to 20 years. But the season, the land management, and the groundwater input are some of the important factors that are influencing the level of nutrients. We saw that the floodplain restoration sites are more effective at reducing the level of nutrients than the stream bank stabilization sites. And we saw that the season is a really important factor that's influencing the concentration of total nitrogen and nitrate. Some further research would include monthly water and sediment sampling, additionally macroinvertebrate sampling. We sampled the macroinvertebrates once in October, but we need additional samples, and we would like to analyze the aquatic vegetation. Thank you so much for listening, and I would be happy to answer some questions if you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Usually how we go about this is kind of curated questioning. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and make sure that it's to everyone. Well, while we're waiting on questions, oh, actually, never mind. Liz asks, what was your method for ammonia analysis?
We used standard hack methods. So we had those vials with that are standard for ammonia analysis. I don't actually know their name. They're just hack method analysis that's approved by EPA.
Cool. I had a question. What did you guys use any GIS data for kind of pre and post on this?
Actually, no, we didn't. We didn't use.
Oh, that's fine. Just curious. All right, Greg asks, why is the floodplain restoration more effective compared to the stream bank restoration? What? Well,
yes, the stream bank first of all, the floodplain restoration sites are usually used in the rural areas because there is like more space for them, and the stream bank stabilization sites are used in more urban areas, just because in the urban areas there is not enough space to do floodplain restoration. With the stream bank stabilization, usually people use something like log veins or some structures just to keep the bed and bank stabilized and to provide some habitat for macroinvertebrates or for fish. But that doesn't mean that they will reduce the levels of nutrients that's already in the stream. We just protect the stream of additional levels of nutrients coming inside. While with the floodplain restoration and with the more vegetation that's around the stream, it's really more they're really more effective of reducing the level of excessive nutrients. So even if we have more like coming from the upstream, they're better at reducing the level.
wonderful. And I think that that we could probably talk about legacy sediment issues for an even longer period of time than this meeting allows.
Yes.
We could all just go on about that. I have another question while we're just waiting to see if we have any others. So again, a reminder for everyone, if you have a question, please type it in. We'll kind of just go for another couple minutes for questions on this one before we move on. But my question was, how, like personally, have you seen how this floodplain restoration has gone versus how they did it at the Lime Creek one, or Spring Lime Creek? It's off of 741 in Lancaster. I don't know if you had seen any of that because they did a similar sort of commercially driven project.
Oh, I haven't seen. I'm not sure if I've seen it. Yeah, but we were really focused on Lititz Run. Like I've been sampling there for almost 2 years. All the other streams that I've visited or that I've been to, I'm not saying anything bad. It's just like these restorations are really working. Like they did a great job. Of course, there is place always for improvement, but compared to what it was, like I've seen previous photos, and we've seen like previous the concentrations of nutrients from before. Like they had a lot of floods, or some of the historical data, the levels of nutrients were 40 or 50 milligrams per liter. Like this is a great improvement from what it was like 20 to 30 years ago.
Oh, yes, yes. And that's definitely a problem people have to we all have to deal with, is that we really need to clear out so much of these floodplains, but of every stream is just a monumental task. Oh my. All right, so Aleksandra, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are going to move now on to Sarah Ryan. And Sarah, are you getting ready?
I'm here. Give me just a second. I thought I didn't realize I was going to be second. Let me. Okay, can everyone see that and hear me?
I can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm presenting on the impact of precipitation on de-icing salt transport in a bioretention basin. I'm presenting on behalf of the main authors, Carrie Fisher, Shirley Clark, Lauren McPhillips, and Hong Wu. I have come late to the party on this one, so I'm picking up where they have left off, and I'll get into that more at the end of the presentation. But Carrie wasn't able to present tonight, and so she asked me to step in. As we all know, during the cold weather months in central PA, we're subject to a mix of precipitation events that range from rain to freezing rain, sleet to snow, sometimes all occurring in one event. And due to the desire to keep our streets free from ice and snow accumulations that would prevent vehicle travel, roadway clearing efforts are aggressive and typically pursued through road salt application. And then, of course, plowing when snow begins to accumulate. Approximately 15 million tons of salt are applied each year, according to the EPA, predominantly halite, which we know lowers the freezing point of water, degrades water quality, and this added salt degrades quality and health of waters and biosystems. PennDOT has applied approximately 810,000 tons of salt to the 95,600 lane miles that they are in control of in the past 5 winters. That comes out to about 1.7 tons of salt per lane mile every year, which ultimately washes off into roadways and into nearby soils and waterways. So what does this excess salt do to stormwater management facilities? We're specifically looking at bioretention systems. And just to give you a background on what basics of bioretention, basically they are stormwater facilities that are designed to mitigate stormwater runoff before that water enters the water bodies. They're common in urban areas to address water quality. They are also known as rain gardens. There are a few different names for them, but rain garden is another term for them. They are highly vegetated and they use a variety of methods to process the water, predominantly evapotranspiration and infiltration. As you can see here on the, so you get your runoff, the plants provide evapotranspiration, You also get infiltration in the right kind of soils. And then that, as it infiltrates into the basin itself, it exfiltrates down into the groundwater or into the ground soil beneath. I just wanted to show you a detail of that layering effect of the soils themselves. So you have your vegetation on top. As you can see here, this is a photo of one of the sites we sampled. You have your mulch layer or topsoil, and then your media. And then this Brandon Park, where we are doing our research, has a very thick layer of sand, as well as an underdrain. And then sometimes there's this gravel drain or not. In this case, it's just the thick sand layer, and then there's existing soils. So road salt application leads to decreased effluent water quality. A review of available research shows us this. Poor metal removal rates, and it leads to poor metal removal rates and leaching of zinc from soils. The salt infiltrates to groundwater. And for example, in Toronto, over half of the salt applied entered the groundwater. Net negative charge in most soils attract the sodium ions and allow the chloride ions to pass through and continue traveling with flow. This causes high stress on plants and inhibits growth, particularly native plants, at least in this region, because our plants aren't typically salt tolerant. So the first basin that we began our studies on was in Brandon Park, which is in central southwest city of Lancaster. It's adjacent to Wabank Street, as you can see here. So this is our location map. And then we have the basin itself. If you can see that tiny little thing in Brandon Park. The yellow is the drainage area. So this is all the water that drains into this little basin. And you can see it's predominantly residential urban. So the Brandon Park Upper Bioretention Basin was rehabilitated in 2018. Originally it was installed in 2012, but the metals, salts, and sediment accumulation, along with erosion, led to poor plant health and poor performance. So it needed to be rehabilitated. They removed and replaced the top 8 inches of soil with topsoil and a sand, loamy sand amended soil amended with organic matter, as you could see in that previous slide. They also installed perforated underdrains to encourage infiltration. The design soil infiltration rate was 6 inches per hour. And they also installed over 1,000 new plant plugs. So you can see this is the drainage plan. You can see it has 2 inlets and then 2 outlets. And this is a photo. You can see all the vegetation. It's looking in this direction on that plan. And here's a more detailed setup of our data collection locations. So we have the inlet here. We have a flow sensor here. We have another flow sensor here. We also have soil sensors embedded all along here. And we have a flow sensor along our center inlet. And we had one along our far outlet, but it seems to have disappeared on that, which is one of the hazards of studies in urban areas. So here's another photo taken in September of 2020. You can see it's very well vegetated. This represents the inlet flow paths coming from the Wabank Street pipings. And there, as you can see, it's hidden by the vegetation. And then about here and way back here are the domed outlets, just to give you a visualization. So our data, this is a graph of our compiled data. Electrical conductivity is a measurement of the salinity. The hourly precipitation is in millimeters. As you can see, conductivity increases when precipitation falls as rain. And soil conductivity levels do not return to baseline until after several rainfall events. So the variety of precipitation types, along with the temperature variations above and below freezing throughout these months, generated this data, and it reveals that weather cycling on salinity of water entering the soil of a bioretention basin. In the 3-month winter period, there were multiple snow and wintry precipitation storm events, with 3 of them resulting in de-icing, which we have here. Now, we show these as points, however, there were several passes made throughout those. When no substantial water flow entered the basin, the salinity didn't change in the top 8 inches of soil. However, when precipitation was in the form of rain, it had a significant effect on soil salinity. When rain followed a de-icing salt application, conductivity increased substantially. When precipitation events occurred as rain, but temperatures were far enough above freezing that de-icing methods were not used, the rain washed that salt out from the soil pores and conductivity decreased. Of note, you'll see that the conductivity began to increase over and over. So as more salt was added, even with flushing events, conductivity increased. And it took soil conductivity measurements in the sandier soil. It took over 60 days after the end of the last recorded salting application to decrease to baseline levels. And we'll look a little bit more at that here coming up. So this just shows the different salting events and how much salt was added in each one. It was provided by the city of Lancaster. The exact time of the passes weren't known, and the application rates varied. So this event here is what I'm going to show in more detail. And we also don't know what the residents did. Since this was an urban area, people would have been salting their sidewalks and their walkways, potentially. So that's something to keep in mind. So here is a more detailed look that we can talk about. So you can see we had no soil response in conductivity here, and temperatures were very cold, -7 degrees Celsius, even though we had the light rain. Then we had some snow and heavy snow. The temperatures came up a little bit. And then we started to see snow and rain, rain, a mix of precipitation of rain. And then as the temperature rose, and let me just backtrack, we had the salting application we are showing here. But again, I want to note that this was salting, the salting was extended throughout this period. So it wasn't just one application, but because we didn't know exactly the times, we have it identified as a point. So here you can see that this conductivity increases, and we, again, that is show as the temperature rise, we're getting more results. And then when it's really raining and flowing, you can see that our conductivity is rising, and this baseline, it spikes and it comes back, spikes and comes back, but it never returns to that baseline. And that that baseline is never returned to until several rainfall events after the last de-icing. And here is in a table form. You can see this is our baseline salinity of the 2 ports, which are near our prime areas of interest. And you can see the baseline salinity. And you can see that it increases after each event. So the salt is not getting fully flushed out of the system. And then it's slowly coming back down, not quite to baseline levels, even 43 days after the last. So basically salinity in the soil is increasing throughout the winter. When temperatures are less than 0.2 degrees Celsius, there's not really change in the soil salinity concentrations, and higher salt concentrations linger weeks after salting. So, further investigation is how will this affect spring plant growth, and how does it generally affect watersheds and ecosystems? And where is that salt going when it does get flushed? So I just wanted to show you another basin that we are starting to investigate. We haven't fully analyzed this data, but this one had, instead of that nice sandy underlayer, it has this very clay-like layer as the underlayer, and it's starting to have this like shale-like action, which we suspect, but we have yet to have the soil analysis done, but we suspect that might be some interaction from the salting. But this one is taking even longer to come back down, and it's staying at the higher salinity. And again, we hypothesize that that is due to that clay underlayer. As you can see, the soils were not amended as well. There's not an underdrain. So just to give you a visual, it's very striking how different they look, even though we don't have the full analysis back yet. So ongoing investigation includes, we want to do more sample locations. We're getting that soil sample analysis done. We're looking at total salts, organic net matter, total nitrogen, and total carbon. We're going to continue to monitor. We've actually realigned our conductivity measurements so that we are measuring stacked measurements, so we can see deeper into the soil to see, you know, where is that salt getting flushed down or flushed out. And again, we're still measuring flow and precipitation, and we want to do a robust comparison between those two different bioretention basins. And I just want to say thank you to the city of Lancaster for providing us, allowing us to access their basin and providing with the salting data. Carrie Fisher, Shirley Clark, Lauren McPhillips, Hongwu, Penn State Harrisburg, and Harrisburg University. Thank you.
Wonderful. A lot of clapping emojis. All right, everyone. Again, this is our time for our questions and comments. Please toss them in the chat, and we can share them. This was definitely a very interesting topic. We bring up, of course, salt in like every you know, almost every other environmental science class. I know that we teach at Harrisburg University. I know it must surely get brought up at Penn State Harrisburg.
It's definitely a big issue, considering, you know, we just salt the roads and we don't, I mean, we obviously there's research out there, but understanding how it's impacting our basins along the roadways, like especially as we're starting to see this almost like cement-like layer forming in some of them. Do we need to, you know, redo our basins every so many years? What does it mean for long-term maintenance and function of our basins?
Yes. Now, Aleksandra writes, was halite the only significant road salt used at this site?
I do not know the specifics on that, but I will find out. I believe it is, but I can't confirm that one.
Were there what was the most other than halite? What did they generally use in the area?
A lot of times they use something called anti-skid, which is basically that gravel, or instead of actual rock salt, they will spray a brine down, which is also a salt brine to prevent ice from forming. So if you see that like powder, like weird white powdery layer before a snowfall event, that's the brine.
Now, well, I guess I'll go to Robert's question for my question. So Robert says, say salt was now proposed as a new technology to reduce ice on roads. Would it be approved today, do you think?
That's a good question. It's a balance between business needs and environmental needs, and business needs typically win out over environmental needs. So it probably would be, but I'm just totally speaking off the cuff on that one.
Greg asks, how do you hope your results are used in the future as related to road salt management?
So like I was saying before, I think it would go speak to long-term maintenance needs. understanding first how it's impacting the performance of our roadside basins, and then B, understanding how it's impacting our environment, like where long term, where is that salt going? And I don't know that we are fully aware of that. Groundwater, is this going to our groundwater, or or is it going into our streams? That's the next question to really track that down.
All right, Aleksandra asks, was there any evidence of salt precipitating in the pores of the local soils in the area?
At this site, that we'll find out with our soil sample analysis. That's why we're doing that total salt measurement. However, at this site, I did not see anything when I was taking the samples that showed that. Now I took the samples in fall. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when I sample again in the spring. However, at the basin with that clay underlayer, there's that it was this very unusual shaling effect with that clay soil, that silty clay soil. And that's again where we want that analysis, but we suspect that that might be some evidence of a chemical interaction with the clay and the salt.
Rebecca asks, are you aware of any studies that look at the use of magnesium chloride?
Off the top of my head, I am not sure. I suspect they're out there. I am not 100% sure for this one, because that was not, I was mostly generally focusing on the overall results, not into the details of the types of salts yet.
So my own question here is
Sure.
Like, I guess, given that maybe every now and then, say, like, this is, this study is, let's just say this study blows up and is like implemented heavily in just the Harrisburg area. How much area, through the region do you think would have to be sort of every couple of years, tore back up to make use of this? I don't how much do you happen to know how many like bioretention features there are within just like Harrisburg city limits?
Not off the top of my head, but I know there are many. It's a very popular method. It's not quite as popular for PennDOT along roadsides. They tend to do the more traditional basins, but those basins are still getting that same salt. So we could almost extrapolate some of this into our different storm, anything that is like any sort of retention pond or infiltration. Basically anything that is relying on infiltration, I think we would very much want to look at, because if it stops performing as an infiltration basin, which there's some evidence that happens over time, going back to that one slide, just, you can see the difference in, this was just made in 2018. This is a much older basin and they didn't amend the soils. So if you're starting to get this, cementation of the soils, you're going to lose your infiltration capacity. So it's about quantifying how quickly does that happen. And that's where we would obviously want to study more basins to get a general average.
All right, so everyone, if you have a final question, make sure to put it in. Rob asks, would using more salt tolerant grasses and plants in the rain gardens sequester some of the salt?
That's a very good question, and that is part of our next steps, to look at what's going on with the vegetation, or any of these, is the vegetation uptaking any of this. And so that's where we would want to have that analysis done.
That is a interesting concept. I wonder about, like, what, I mean, for me, when I think of salt tolerant grasses and stuff, I think of ones that are within, related to tidal environments, even distally. Like, could some of those be brought into these bioretention areas and actually survive and actually do what we want them to do.
Yeah, yes, that's definitely an excellent point. And for the next steps, like I said, this is a very fledgling study, and there's a lot more to do with it. And I also am new to it myself, so I'm still learning as well.
All right, well, Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we are going to that is the end of our first half from Penn State Harrisburg. We are now going to be moving over to our other set of students. These are Dakota Cleary and Aaron Stone from Harrisburg University. And so before they give their talks, I just want to give another quick background for those of you who are unfamiliar with how Harrisburg University does some of their undergraduate projects. And that is we have what is traditionally known as a undergrad thesis, but it is divided into two parts, a project 1 and a project 2. In project 1, they work on the background literature review to make sure that the project that they'd like to do is feasible before they go on to the part 2 of that project, which is what many of us would be familiar with when they think of an undergraduate thesis. So that is required for every graduate at Harrisburg University, in addition to an internship. So I like to, think it's a little comprehensive, but of course I might be terribly biased. So with that, I'm going to call up Dakota. Dakota, are you ready to go?
I believe so.
Wonderful. Well, you can get to share on your screen whenever you're ready.
All right. And one moment. All right, can you guys see that and hear me all right?
We can see and hear you fine.
All right. So yes, just like Professor Mike Myers just said, for my project 1 here at Harrisburg University, I researched how trail use impacts the overall water quality in nearby bodies of water. And this will act as a prelude for my project 2, doing the actual field work related to the subject in the Michoud State Forest. And so the importance of this research is due to a growing interest in hiking and really a growing interest in outdoor activities in general, such as fishing, paddle boating, kayaking, camping, bicycling, what have you. This project is more focused towards trail use, and so areas concentrating users in given areas greatly alters the environmental balance of the ecosystem, ultimately creating a domino effect impacting water quality. While the research out there right now on this subject is currently minimal, what the researchers do know about this topic is that trails condense hikers on a single path, leading to changed soil composition that really promotes uplifting and erosion, which flows downhill, leading straight into any nearby body of water. However, with the lack of research, no best management practice has been pinpointed to decipher what impacts water quality the most and what implementations should be considered in protecting natural areas such as these state forests. This research consisted of, again, collecting literature reviews about how trail use impacts water quality and the factors that contribute to lower water quality standards. And so the hypothesis for this research is that trail use for both mechanized and non-mechanized purposes directly impacts water quality in a negative way. Looking at this graph here, you can see that just from 2006 to 2015 alone have seen a growing interest in outdoor activities, jumping up nearly an additional 8 million people taking interest in outdoor recreation. It's not listed here. However, there has been noted a pretty substantial spike in participants in outdoor activities during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the study population of this research were several analyses performed on trail use within natural parks. The collected articles analyzed trails and nearby streams within natural parks across the U.S., with one of the earliest articles dating back to 2009, just to keep this research present. Collections consisted mainly of water and soil samples from a variety of stream and trail locations, to compare the deviations and makeup between impacted locations and locations that were relatively undisturbed from mainly human impact. The analysis performed focused on the trail type, in which researching this topic, 3 main trail types were categorized as motorized, non-motorized, and non-mechanized. And so for this research, the 3 categories were condensed into 2 categories as mechanized and non-mechanized trail types. Soil composition was also analyzed, again, looking at how they differ from disturbed versus undisturbed locations, pollution from users, and how it affects the ecosystem. Also, macroinvertebrates, due to their act as a bioindicator, and analyze the overall water quality, where trails are either in the general vicinity of a body of water, or where trails cross directly through a stream. Looking at the trail types, mechanized trails are being defined as allowing for all highway and non-highway vehicles, as well as including horseback riding, pack stock, and pack stock was included solely for it being a designated research topic and one of the references I was looking into, as well as biking. Mechanized trails were found to have wider trail sections, not just due to the wider trail standards or regulations imposed on these types of trails, but also because of the use on the trails, whether purposely or unintentionally, for maneuverability reasons, which results in torn up vegetation from constant use and tear from the tires. Also, due to the greater aggressive nature of the tires from both biking and vehicles in general, sediment is worn and uplifted, exposing the bedrock on these trails. And then the aggressive use, as already mentioned, tears up vegetation in the nearby vicinity of the trail. And so with these factors mentioned of tearing up vegetation, the consequences result in uplifting and transportation of sediment. Rutted sections are created, exposing, and really this is exposing sediment to natural elements, promoting erosion and runoff into streams. And this ultimately contributes the most to in-stream pollution, mainly sediment pollution, in comparison to non-mechanized trails. And mechanized trails also contribute the most sedimentation in the streams compared to what storm conditions would on undisturbed lands. Non-mechanized trails are designed purely for hikers, as well as basic campsites that allow for like tents, hammocks, or anything of that nature, prohibiting any use of motorized vehicles. Also, as well as mechanized or any kind of mechanical contraption, or any kind of pack stock horses, anything of that nature. While not quite as impactful as mechanized trails, stream crossings at trails designated for hikers also showed an increase in pollution and sedimentation, which directly was distributed into the streams. And then higher concentrations were generally downstream opposed to upstream, obviously through the flow of the water current moving downstream. Non-mechanized trails were also more compacted than any other trail due to the concentration of trampling on a single path, which then leads to lower infiltration rates and more runoff. The higher amounts of runoff and its gaining velocity downhill then generates the uplifting and erosion of sediment being placed directly into the streams. This is especially true for informal trails, which I'll get into a little bit later, as they tend to run perpendicular to slope contours. And then Along with hiking and camping, more trash is generally left behind on these types of trails, contributing to the hormone and plastic component pollution into streams, which will also be discussed a little bit later. And so this chart compared 3 structured trail stream crossings, bridges, culverts, and fords together in relation to sedimentation amounts. And while mechanized trail types were responsible for more overall sedimentation due to runoff, in this chart here, or as you can see, the non-mechanized trail types, keeping in mind combining the motorized and non-motorized trail types together, had ultimately created more sedimentation directly into the streams, presumably due to easier access to streams in comparison to being on any type of mechanized contraption or horses. However, when considering for this research that motorized and non-motorized types are combined under mechanized, this chart shows that mechanized trail types in this sense show when they do partake in in-stream activities, their impacts are more catastrophic in comparison to non-mechanized crossings. As I briefly mentioned earlier, within each trail type, there are 2 subcategory trail types known as formal and informal trails within each type of trail. Formal trails are intentionally created and located to coincide with slope contours to minimize the effects of erosion. And these trails are also maintained to ensure a quality ecological balance or production and to minimize the effects of human-made damage. Informal trails, on the other hand, are usually made by users in creating a shortcut that tend to be more sporadic and run perpendicular to slope contours, which then correlates to the greater risk of runoff, as the straight flow downhill maximizes velocity of runoff, promoting the greater sediment uplifting and erosion. And so focusing more so within the yellow outline, it is notable that informal trails account for the majority of trails, and that informal trails are responsible for significantly more forest vegetation loss and contribute to almost double of the overall forest loss in comparison to formal trails. This really highlights the greater impact that informal trails have on an ecosystem when used improperly and not maintained. And so commonalities between all trail types are that there are altered composition to soil, as constant use damages vegetation, reducing overall plant biomass, and it also inhibits future seed germination, wiping out the soil of any nutrients, which may lead to any introduction to invasive or any kind of ruderal plants. With vegetation being absent along the trails to act as an anchor for soil, constant use easily displaces soil that leads to exposed bedrock, especially on trails allowing for these aggressive types of mechanisms and or steeper sloped trails. In many cases as well, soil compaction occurs due to constant pressure from trail use, which is responsible for lower infiltration rates during storm conditions from the lack of aeration in these compacted soils, and then ultimately generating greater runoff. And so analyzing erosion, GIS and LIDAR are the new technological tools being utilized to measure changes in topography over a period of time. This is to better understand the variables that are causing erosion and to even forecast areas of sedimentation into streams. As mentioned in the last slide, soil compaction also plays a factor in erosion, as compacted soil increases runoff and exposed soil or bedrock is easily transported. And this is especially true for mechanized contraptions or animals such as pack stock. Looking at macroinvertebrates, these organisms are small aquatic organisms or insect larvae that are essential to the overall health of an aquatic ecosystem. They are primary consumers and act as the foundation for the food chain, and any disruption in the abundance of macroinvertebrates disrupts the entire diversity within the ecosystem. Microinvertebrates also play an important role in nutrient cycling, as they feed on both nutrients and algae to balance nutrient amounts to a sustainable level. And these organisms are the biggest asset really for researchers, as they are used again as a bioindicator, or an organism that is used to analyze the overall health of, in this case, aquatic ecosystems. Macroinvertebrates are generally abundant within streams, making for easy collection, and their abundance is contingent on the physical, chemical, and biological environment of the water, and to a certain extent, the resilience in polluted streams indicate the short and long-term effects pollution has had on streams. The preferred conditions for these macroinvertebrates consist of having clear streams with a rocky stream bed to feed on the nutrients and algae growing on the rocks. And then these conditions will show higher amounts of organisms, whereas streams affected by erosion and suspended sedimentation, along with pollution, gathered up throughout the erosion process, will limit the necessary nutrients and algae impacting the survival of macroinvertebrates, and thus create a chain reaction in terms of abundance in other organisms higher on the food chain. And really, this is whose survival is contingent on the health of macroinvertebrates. With this said, higher levels of macroinvertebrates correlates to a healthy and balanced aquatic ecosystem, having clear streams with a rocky bottom and an abundance of other organisms relying on the survival of macroinvertebrates. When considering just the in-stream hiking and the hiking activities and how it immediately impacts the ecosystem, this graph here shows how in-stream hiking affects the macroinvertebrates and the biodiversity within test sites, where the graphs on the left-hand side, A and C, show the impact from in-stream activities, where graph A shows the abundance of macroinvertebrates and graph C shows the overall mean diversity in the ecosystem. As you can see in both, areas that are undisturbed show higher amounts, and the greater change indicates the movement of these organisms avoiding the impact from in-stream activities. On the right-hand side, graph B and D are results taken from the same locations without these in-stream activities. And as you can see, the sites are much more evened out, and really highlighting how in-stream activities impacts the distribution and overall diversity in an aquatic ecosystem. Still looking at water quality, the pollution in streams also considering some trail pollution. Sedimentation is the greatest source of pollution, along with E. coli, and also collected with the sediment, mainly pharmaceuticals and hormones, were the main unnatural chemicals found in these study sites. Within the majority of these study sites, the pharmaceuticals found consisted of insect repellent, caffeine, acetaminophen, and nicotine. Hormones consisted of natural steroids, testosterone, gut metabolites, plastic components from trash, progesterone, and cholesterol. Between pack stock and/or hiker stream crossings, pack stock sites had higher concentrations of pollutants at downstream locations. Summing everything up, mechanized trails promoted the greatest damage to, or promoted the greatest damage to trails, making them a greater threat to streams due to the higher abundance of rutted sections and exposure of bedrock. And this really created greater concentrations of sedimentation in streams, especially during storm conditions. Non-mechanized trails, on the other hand, posed a greater threat in higher runoff due to compacted soil and significant erosion, specifically on informal trails that create, again, a more direct path towards streams. Other threats posed by non-mechanized trails include hormone and pharmaceutical pollution. And so nonetheless, both trail types negatively impact water quality with factors that promote erosion and contamination into the waters, whether these pollutants are chemical, natural, biological, or what have you. And so again, while lack of research has been able to best create concrete solutions for best management practices, observations from researchers suggest many trail alterations and land features may aid in maintaining water quality. Trails could contain berms to force, per se, users to stay on the trail, almost acting as a guardrail. Gravel roads or trails is a newer concept that has not gained much merit yet. However, these types of trails have shown to reduce invasive plant growth and seems to maintain healthy vegetation parallel to trails. Structured crossings such as bridges, culverts, and fords could also be used to reduce uplifting of the loose soil on stream beds from users while still maintaining a good trail experience. Some natural land features include low gradient slopes and vegetation to lower the velocity of runoff and allow time for runoff to infiltrate the ground, essentially acting as a buffer or a line of defense for streams. And then lastly, general maintenance of the trails to picking up any sources of pollution and trash, and maintaining trails to keep both safe for sustainable environment for both users and hikers, as well as maintaining vegetation to prevent invasive species and an abundance of vegetation to prevent easy uplifting. And I do believe that is it. So if you guys have any questions, I will be happy to answer any.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dakota. Again, as a reminder for everyone, if you have a question for our speaker, please put it in the chat and we will make sure it gets asked. So Rebecca asks, so what is a national park and should this be a national park?
What is a national park?
Yes, like I think under it is the area that you're looking at a national park. Should it be a national park? Do you just think?
Well, I mean, in terms of the research, I honestly kind of just taking the word of the authors. As for where I will be doing the research, that will be a state forest. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Right. They're asking if you think the state forest should be a national park.
I can't say I have much of an opinion. I never really put much thought into that.
Dan asks, this research appears to be quite new. Could it open doors to additional studies of the impacts of trail usage to water quality and or lead to improved trail maintenance and stronger regulations regarding trail usage?
Yes, I would say so. There's definitely not a whole lot of research out there right now, which is why we're taking part in researching it. Whether or not it will lead to new regulations, I don't know, but I would believe that as more research comes out about the negative impacts of trail use on water quality, that better practices or standards for trails will be implemented.
Well, and Dakota, who are you working with again with this that would also be relevant to that question?
Christine Proctor.
Well, I mean, further than that, right? Like you're working with the people invested in the state forest, correct?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So you're working with the foundations and stuff in the area. So there definitely is, people are interested in that. Additional questions. So Rob asked, could additional research incorporate input from indigenous communities?
Oh my, that's another question. I really never, that's a factor I never really considered. Yeah, I would assume so.
All righty. Well, this definitely, I think that they're getting at, this has a huge, potential, right? Even very much outside of PA, because so many in the Western areas, like so many off-road trails and such, are through areas that have, held special cultural significance for indigenous communities. Anyone else? Well, I'm Not seeing any other questions. So Dakota, thank you so very much.
No problem.
All right, Aaron is our next and final speaker. Aaron, are you ready?
Yep, I just got to get the slides pulled up. I just want to make sure it's the right one. because I now have two monitors hooked up.
I get it.
Is this the, are you seeing just the title
Yep,
slide or are you seeing the
correct.
whole? It's just the title slide, right?
Correct.
All right. So this is my project one presentation. It was on construction and demolition waste reuse, utilizing C&D waste as a sustainable growth media. So first, I'd like to talk about the prevalence and importance of C&D waste recycling in developing countries. Currently, developing countries are struggling with three major problems. Creating and maintaining urban green space, providing equitable green space access, and managing construction and demolition outputs. Now, traditional C&D waste recycling reduces the amount of landfill use and unsustainable waste disposal. It reduces the amount of new construction material that needs to be collected and created. And it also reduces imbalances between construction material supply and demand. And over here on the right is an image of the various types of construction and demolition waste. I'm going to go more into that later on. But two problems that traditional C&D waste recycling doesn't resolve relating to urbanization are green space loss and management and soil loss and management issues. But there is a potential solution to this problem to these problems that involve C&D waste. And that solution is using C&D waste as a sustainable growth media. It would be an alternative to traditional fill, which is notoriously more related to building and architecture, and it's not really, it's the focus of traditional fill is not really like the microbiome and whether or not the soil can grow or sustain life. It's more just a medium to put foundation on. And this would also provide a sustainable way to create urban green space while also reducing waste production. But of course, C&D waste cannot just immediately be turned into soil. It has to go through a three-step process. But before I go over that process, I'd like to bring up the green space distribution in the developing countries, China and India. In China, only about 46.1% of the urban population live within about half a kilometer of a 300 square meter green space. Now, to put that in perspective, a 300 square meter green space is about the size of one suburban house plot. While in India, specifically in Calcutta, India, green space per capita is expected to decrease from about 16 square meters in 1991 to about 4 square meters in 2035. Both of these countries obviously are suffering inequitable green space access, and there's a dire need to right that inequity. And here in this figure, it's just showing the green space availability across Calcutta, India from 1991 all the way into 2035. And as you can see, only one location in the entirety of Calcutta, India actually has 30 to 40% of, or 30% green space coverage, I'm sorry. Nothing of greater than 40% by 2035. So next, I'd like to talk about the presence of C&D waste recycling, and that by C&D waste recycling, I mean traditional C&D waste recycling in developing countries. So C&D waste recycling is not very prevalent in developing countries as compared to developed countries. Now, on here, on this x-axis, those developing countries include France, the UK, Italy, Spain, Belgium, and Germany, while the developing countries are China and Bangladesh. And over here on the y-axis is the million tons of C&D waste produced in 2019, while on the y-axis over here, it is the percent by weight that is either landfilled or recycled. And as you can see, in 2019, China produced 350 million tons of C&D waste, but 92% of that, or 322 million tons, was landfilled or unsustainably used or disposed of. While only 8% of that was recycled, which is only 28 million tons of C&D waste. And there's 5 main causes for this issue. The first and foremost being lack of regulation, excessive delegation, the next being excessive delegation. There's also lack of data, lack of awareness, and slow growth in the recycling industry in general. And here in this figure down below is the same 5 reasons, just listed in a more wordy manner. And of the 10 experts that were interviewed in this study, 7 to 9 of these experts addressed at least one of these issues as a problem. Oops. Next, I'd like to talk about the behavioral perception of C&D waste recycling in developing countries. So companies and individuals from these countries are more open to C&D waste recycling when the perceived benefits are explained, they feel capable of doing it themselves, and regulations are in place, and doing so benefits the environment. As you can see from this figure here on the right, here are the studied behavioral factors that would influence actual behavior. Anything that's listed in green is a positive influence. Anything listed in red is a negative influence. Anything listed in black is a not really an influence at all. And based on the list of benefits or things that make developing or individuals in developing countries more open to waste recycling are perceived benefits, which is the strongest of all positive influences, while the only strong negative is also perceived costs. The second bullet is planned behavioral control. Third is linked to regulatory pressure, regulations are in place. And the last is environmental consciousness. So after going through all that, I'd finally like to go into the waste to soil conversion. But before going into the 3-step process, I have to further explain the difference between inert and non-inert waste. So inert waste is any sort of C&D waste that is not decomposable. It's examples that include sand, concrete, brick, metals, even plastics, and some of those constituents can serve as the abiotic body for the soil. The other category of C&D waste is non-inert, which is anything that is decomposable. That includes wood, bamboo, paper, cloth, and some forms of rubber, and it will serve as the artificial organic material for the synthetic soil matrix. And so the 3-step process involves 3 steps, of course. The first being sorting, which removes the waste products that cannot be used for soil from C&D waste outputs. That would include materials like metals, plastics, rubbers, anything that just wouldn't really be conducive for the soil in the first place. And the next process would be crushing, which reduces the bulk density of the waste to more of a soil level and also fragments the particles down to a soil size. And the final step would be supplementing to provide a provisional microbiome through nutrient supplementing in the soil. So further into the purpose of sorting, it separates the usable from the unusable, because not all waste can be used, especially not metals or plastics or anything of that sort. They're just not conducive for the soil. Thankfully, a lot of these unused materials may be recycled or reused traditionally. The reuse of metals is already profitable. As you can see in China and Bangladesh, metal sells for 1,000 US dollars by the ton, and 480 in Bangladesh for by the ton as well. Next would be the purpose of crushing, which the main purpose is to reduce bulk density. This is mostly for inert waste, because even all raw waste is too dense. Not all, but all hard waste is too dense. In a healthy medium grain soil, the bulk density is about 1,330 kilograms per square meter, with a bulk density that's low, with a bulk density being a little lower in higher organic material soils. And the second purpose of crushing is also to fragment the particles to a usable size. Over here on this figure on the right, on the x-axis is the different forms of C&D waste, from inert or non-inert, mixed to inert, and on the y-axis is the bulk densities of each in kilograms per meter squared. So the upper range of non-inert waste, which includes hardwoods and plywoods, etc., ranges from about 2,434 to about 336 kilograms per meter squared. And the lower range of the non-inert waste, which ranges from about 287 to 45 kilograms per meter squared, which includes papers, cloths, and some forms of rubbers and other things like that. And the upper range of inert waste, which has a bulk density of between 2,435 kilograms per meter squared to 991. That's concretes, metals, and anything of that sort. Lower range is from 949 to 207, sand and fill, anything that's just soft but still not particularly decomposable materials. While the upper range of mixed waste is just a mixture of the two. It has a higher, the reason it has a higher maximum bulk density is because if you combine both inert waste and non-inert waste together, that's already dense, it can only get denser. It's never going to become less dense, but I mean, that's not to say that it could never become less dense, but just in the sense that its maximum is always going to be higher than both inert and non-inert. And the same, the lower range is just mixed off waste ranging from 476 to 146 kilograms per meter squared. And this makes sense that it's between the bulk densities of each, because it can't be as low as the bulk density of the lowest bulk density of non-inert waste, because if it's mixed waste, it has to have at least some soft inert waste within it. So and overall, it just cannot be as low as inert waste, but it still cannot be quite as high as inert waste because of the inclusion of the non-inert waste. And finally, the purpose of supplementing. Obviously, C&D waste doesn't contain any vital nutrients, or doesn't really contain any vital nutrients to support a microbiome in its solid state. Thankfully, some of those nutrients actually can be reclaimed through adsorption and to be made into a nutrient fertilizer, but that's only for phosphates. You'd have to look into this. You'd have to look into study number or a reference number 9 to have more information on that. Otherwise, an ideal growth media has about 20:1 to 30:1 carbon and nitrogen ratio. It includes Hoagland solution, which you can reference. You can reference my reference number 9 to find out more about that. It also has a loamy texture and 3 to 6% organic material. And to make up for that organic material, that non-inert waste can be composted into it and using it would stimulate the microbiome. And over here on the right, I have 4 figures showing 3 different soils being treated with either just compost, Hoagland solution, or both Hoagland solution and compost, as well as a control soil, and their various plant heights and dry root weights during their vegetative and reproductive states of strawberry plants. And during each treatment, the treatment that was treated with both compost and Hoagland solution continually yielded the best results. Not only that, but but supplementing also stimulates the microbiome. And this is because the microbiome health is dependent on nutrient availability, which is what supplementing provides. And a healthy microbiome provides the soil with the ability to complete biological and chemical processes of soil formation faster, and it also reduces aggregate instability and bulk density. As you can see in this figure, on the x-axis, there's there's experimental years, and on the y-axis is the soil biomass of various compost treatments of soil. And except on this far left, white bar is the control soil, which was not composted. And you can see it's microbial. Each one that was composted is microbial biomass increases while the control does not. And the same goes for aggregate instability. All of them decrease except for the control. And the same goes for bulk density, where each compost treatment decreases while control stays the same. Microbial health also aids with plant diversity. Now, there are in these 5 types of different urban green spaces, old revegetation and young revegetation are groups of urban green space that are more left to their own devices, and their microbiomes become fairly healthy in doing so. According to this chart, the Simpson's diversity of young revegetation is about 0.9. The species richness was 29, microbiome condition was healthy, and the nutrient contents were fairly rich in nitrate, nitrogen, and phosphorus. The old revegetation saw the same Simpson's diversity with a species richness of 26, a healthy microbiome, and the same richness in nutrients. And both of these were fairly healthy. These are seen as an ideal picture of what urban green space should be. And these bottom 3 are more man-made, man-controlled, man-monitored urban green spaces. And the first being community gardens, which had a Simpson's diversity of 0.8 and a species richness of 34. Its microbial similarity to the revegetation groups was high. Its nutrient similarity was moderate. It was much higher in phosphorus, but that's understandable given the amount of phosphorus fertilizers people would probably be using on their community garden. And the next was the sports fields, which did not have a Simpson's diversity or species richness because there was only one species of plant, and that was just grass. And the microbial similarity to the revegetation groups was low, and the nutrient similarity was also low, and the only nutrient that the sports fields were fairly high in was ammonia nitrogen. And the final man-made group was the parklands, with a Simpson's diversity of 0.6, a species richness of 10, a microbial similarity that was moderately similar to the revegetation groups, and a nutrient similarity that was highly similar to the revegetation groups. Of the 3 man-made groups or man-managed groups, the community gardens was actually the most similar to the revegetation groups. And that's because the microbial similarity actually had a stronger influence on the plant diversity and species richness of the area than the nutrient similarity did. So in summary, the C&D waste must go through a 3-step process to become a synthetic soil. It must go through sorting, crushing, and supplementing. But by utilizing this synthetic soil, it may increase proper waste management in developing countries, achieve equitable and healthy green space access, and it would also foster more positive C&D waste recycling attitudes within developing countries. In conclusion, and for future steps of research, I must conduct a study to determine the practical viability of C&D waste as a growth media. But even once this study is completed, soil will not undo environmental injustice. This research strongly suggests that stronger regulation be placed on how C&D waste is managed in developing countries, and possibly even some places in developed countries like the US. But with that, that is it. And these are my references, and thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Aaron. Many clap emojis. Yours is definitely an interesting topic, but using all of this, construction waste. There's definitely lots of it, especially in the Harrisburg region, and as I imagine will happen more. In fact, right, if we have more infrastructure spending and such. All right, so everyone, just a reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the chat bar there.
There we go. Oh, thank you for the appraisal.
Do you think, Aaron, that this has applicability in the area?
Yes, I definitely think this is applicable in Harrisburg. I heard from Christine Proctor about some illegal dumping sites actually in Harrisburg that I would like to look into, and maybe actually get some waste from there to look into actually studying. And just on an interesting note, someone actually noted to me that this could actually help with a food waste control, because they were saying instead of using some of the, well, additionally with using some of the non-inert waste, they actually said it might be worth using like food waste from restaurants. Instead of just having those be thrown away and put in a landfill, they could actually be used as organic material as well.
That is a good idea. That would definitely be something to consider for project 2. All right, Aleksandra has a long question, a good question. In some of the proposed construction and demolition disposal sites, I have read about a major concern on whether the C&D waste contain toxic materials like asbestos, shingles, mercury, electrical components, etc. Do you propose that the C&D waste be screened for the presence of such materials?
I would say yes. I mean, I've actually read in the past of places not really screening for those things, and it never really turns out for the best. I think it would be better just to be proactive in that sense rather than just letting it go until later. I would definitely say screen it beforehand. Even if that does increase the cost, it would just be the best idea to screen for those things before it really hits the fan later, for lack of a better term.
Yes. All right, any other questions? We've actually hit our 8 o'clock mark, so if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up today. It's been a fun talk filled with, I think, a varied amount of topics, which has been really nice. Normally, we just hear about one, and far more in depth here. We've got to hear a lot of different types of studies and some interesting stories. Right now, I'd like to everyone give another round of applause to our speakers. They did a great job. I'm also going to ask if the four speakers are able to very quickly toss their cameras on, because I would like to take a screenshot of like everyone presenting. Normally, it's just one person, but here I was hoping to get a quick group shot of everyone.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
Oh, you can. Okay, that's awkward.
All right. Well, you guys can all wave. Oh, hold on a second. One more time here. There we go. Oh, wait. Did I took someone off a window? There we go. All right. I'll wave. Hello. Hi, everyone. Okay. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, that concludes our meeting. Thank you again for the speakers. Remember, there's no January meeting. We will see everyone in February. If we do happen to put up something just in a normal slot, we will let you know. But for the most part, we'll see you in February. Have a happy holiday season and enjoy the new year.
Thank you. Bye.